Before we begin, if you're listening to this alone at night, you're exactly where you should be. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more true horror stories, disturbing encounters, and unexplained events uploaded every day. Now lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's get into tonight's stories. People who haven't lived through a flood usually think the danger comes from deep water. It doesn't. The danger is how fast everything changes. 1 minute, you're driving on dry pavement. 20 minutes later, that same road is a river. Bridges disappear. Power goes out. Cell service dies. And suddenly, you're completely alone. 5 years ago, I got stranded during a flash flood in eastern Kentucky. The flood itself nearly killed me. But what I remember most was the person knocking on doors after every house on that road had already been evacuated. My name is Brandon. At the time, I worked for the county highway department. Most days involved inspecting rural roads after storms, checking culverts, removing fallen trees, making sure bridges were still safe. Nothing exciting. On paper, the forecast that Tuesday looked ordinary. Heavy rain, possible flooding. We'd seen it before. No one expected what happened overnight. Around 4 in the afternoon, dispatch asked me to inspect County Road 17. Several residents had reported water flowing across the pavement. I loaded a few warning signs into my truck and headed out. The rain had already been falling for hours. Creeks that were usually ankle-deep had become fast-moving rivers. By the time I reached the first bridge, muddy water was only a few inches below the guardrails. That wasn't normal. I placed barricades across the bridge entrance and called dispatch. "This one's closing." The operator sighed. "You're the 5th one today." That should have been my warning to head back. Instead, I kept checking the remaining roads. The storm wasn't letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. Lightning flashed constantly behind the hills. Thunder shook the truck every few minutes. Around 7 o'clock, I finished the last inspection and turned toward town. Except, the road home was underwater. Not just covered, gone. A section nearly 100 yards long had become part of the river. Current rushed across it so violently that entire tree trunks floated past. Crossing wasn't an option. Dispatch gave me another route, 20 miles longer. I started driving. 10 minutes later, another bridge was underwater. Then another. Eventually, every road leading back to town was closed. I was trapped. The nearest high ground was a tiny farming community called Mill Creek. Only 6 houses, a church, and an old volunteer fire station. I figured I'd wait there until the water dropped. By the time I arrived, darkness had already fallen. The rain hadn't slowed for a second. The fire station looked abandoned. No lights, no vehicles. The county had built a newer station years earlier. I parked beneath the awning and called dispatch again. No signal. The radio only produced static. Power must have gone out. I climbed inside the building through an unlocked side door. It was dusty, cold, unused. Still, it was dry. About an hour later, I noticed headlights moving through the rain. Another truck. Relief flooded over me. Finally, another person. The pickup slowed outside the station. An older man stepped out wearing yellow rain gear. "You the road inspector?" I nodded. "Everything's flooded." "I know." He looked toward the river. "You shouldn't stay here." "Why?" "The water always comes higher than people think." I looked around. The building sat on the highest ground in town. "It'll be fine." He hesitated, then quietly replied, "Not tonight." Before I could ask what he meant, he climbed back into the truck and drove away. His taillights disappeared into the rain. Around midnight, the electricity returned for less than 3 seconds. The lights inside the station flickered, just long enough for me to notice something. Fresh muddy footprints, leading across the floor, toward the back hallway. They hadn't been there earlier. I followed them with my flashlight. The prints stopped outside a storage room. The door stood slightly open. I pushed it wider. Empty. Old hoses. Broken chairs. Nothing else. Yet the mud on the floor looked fresh. Still wet. I returned to the front office. The rain pounded harder than ever. Then, 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. On the front door. I checked the window. Nobody. The porch was empty. Another 3 knocks. Exactly the same. I opened the door anyway. Nothing. Only rain. Then I looked down. Fresh footprints. Bare feet. Standing on the porch. The tracks led to the doorway. None led away. I shut the door immediately. Locked it. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. A few minutes later, another sound. This time from outside. Someone knocking on another house. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Then another. Farther down the road. Whoever it was moving from house to house. Curiosity got the better of me. I climbed the station's old observation tower. From there, I could see the entire community. The beam of my flashlight barely cut through the rain. Then lightning illuminated the road. For just a second, I saw him. The same man in the yellow rain jacket. Walking toward the next house. Knocking 3 times. Waiting. Then moving on. Every house looked completely dark. Nobody answered. The river reached the edge of the fire station around 2 in the morning. Water crept across the parking lot. I moved my truck onto slightly higher ground behind the building. When I returned, the front door was open. I knew I'd locked it. Inside, the muddy footprints had multiplied. They covered the hallway, the office, even the stairs leading upstairs, as though dozens of people had walked through the station while I was outside. Yet, there wasn't another sound. Then I heard coughing. Weak. Somewhere upstairs. I climbed the staircase slowly. Each step creaked beneath my boots. The second floor had once served as sleeping quarters. Every room was empty, except the last one. Its door stood half open. A lantern glowed faintly inside. I stepped into the room. Nobody. Just an old wooden desk. On top sat a leather notebook. The lantern was warm. Recently lit. I opened the notebook. The final entry was dated 11 years earlier. It described another historic flood. The last sentence read, "I've warned every house except mine." Lightning flashed outside. I looked through the window. The man in the yellow rain jacket stood beside my truck. Looking directly up at me, he slowly raised one hand, pointing toward the river. A deafening crack echoed through the valley. The bridge upstream collapsed. A wall of water surged toward the town. Within seconds, the first floor of the station disappeared beneath muddy water. If I'd stayed downstairs, I would have drowned. The flood peaked just before sunrise. Rescue helicopters finally reached the community around 8. The crew lowered a rescue basket through the broken roof. As we lifted away, I looked down. The fire station sat almost completely underwater. The man in the yellow rain jacket was gone. Back in town, I told a sheriff's deputy everything. The truck, the knocking, the notebook. He listened quietly, then asked, "Yellow rain jacket?" I nodded. He sighed. "There used to be a volunteer firefighter here. Name was Carl. He spent the flood of 2013 driving door to door warning people to evacuate. What happened to him? He never made it home." Months later, after the floodwaters receded, I returned to Mill Creek. The old fire station had been demolished. Nothing remained except the concrete foundation. The notebook had never been found. Neither had the lantern. I walked to where the front entrance used to be. Someone had placed a small memorial there. A bronze plaque. One sentence was engraved beneath Carl's name. He knocked on every door. I stood there for a long time. Then I noticed something strange. The fresh mud beneath the plaque contained a single set of boot prints. They led toward the road. None led back. I still inspect flooded roads every spring. But now, whenever heavy rain begins and someone knocks unexpectedly at my door, I answer immediately. Because someone may still be trying to make sure nobody gets left behind. Most flood maps are updated every few years. They show which neighborhoods will flood first, which roads will disappear, which homes should be evacuated before the river reaches its peak. People trust those maps. I know I did, until I spent one night helping evacuate a small town along the Missouri River, and found an entire neighborhood that wasn't on any of them. The strangest part wasn't that the houses existed. It was that every family inside insisted emergency crews had already driven past them hours earlier. My name is Connor. In the spring of 2021, relentless rain pushed the Missouri River higher than anyone expected. I volunteered with our county emergency response team. Most of what we did wasn't dramatic. We filled sandbags, delivered bottled water, helped elderly residents move furniture before floodwater reached their homes. By the 4th day, the levee outside the town of Ash Hollow was close to failing. Mandatory evacuation orders went out that afternoon. Our team was assigned to check every street one final time before the sheriff closed the bridges. There were 4 of us in 2 pickup trucks. I rode with a firefighter named Ben. The instructions were simple. Drive every road. Knock on every door. Leave no one behind. The first few hours went smoothly. Most families had already left. Those who remained only needed help loading belongings into trailers. By sunset, the town looked almost deserted. Rain continued falling in steady sheets. The river had climbed over the banks and into the lowest streets. Dispatch radioed us. Complete one final sweep, then return immediately. We acknowledged the call and continued. Just after dark, Ben noticed something odd. A narrow road branched off the highway, where neither of us remembered seeing one before. A faded wooden sign stood beside it. Riverview Estates. Neither of us had ever heard of it. Ben unfolded the county map. No subdivision here. I checked the GPS. It showed open farmland. Nothing else. Still, the road was real. Fresh tire tracks disappeared into the darkness. We should check it, I said. Ben hesitated. If it's not on the map, dispatch won't know we're there. I looked at the sky. The rain wasn't letting up. If people live there, they deserve a warning. He nodded. We turned down the road. The neighborhood appeared almost immediately. Small brick homes, neatly trimmed lawns. Mailboxes lined both sides of the street. Porch lights glowed through the rain. It looked lived in, normal, but strangely quiet. No children, no barking dogs, no traffic, just water slowly flowing along the curb. We stopped at the first house. An elderly woman answered after a few knocks. We're with County Emergency Management, Ben said. You need to evacuate tonight. She frowned. They already told us. When? This afternoon. Then why are you still here? She looked confused. They said the buses were coming. There aren't any buses. She stared at us for several seconds, then quietly asked, What year is it? I thought she'd misheard. 2021. The color drained from her face. Without another word, she slowly closed the door. Neither of us said anything as we walked back to the truck. That was strange, Ben finally muttered. I nodded. We continued house to house. Every conversation felt wrong. People acted as though they were waiting for someone. Not rescuers. Someone specific. Several insisted evacuation trucks were only minutes away. Others claimed deputies had just spoken to them. Yet we hadn't seen another emergency vehicle anywhere nearby. At the end of the street, a young father opened the door carrying a toddler. You guys finally came back. We've never been here before. He frowned. Sure you have. He pointed toward my jacket. You were wearing that same raincoat. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I'd never met him. We urged him to leave immediately. He agreed. His wife packed a few bags while we checked neighboring homes. When we returned less than 5 minutes later, the house was empty. Front door open. Lights still on. Their SUV remained in the driveway. There were no footprints in the mud leading away. Only ours. Ben radioed dispatch. Dispatch, we've located approximately 40 occupied homes on Riverview Estates. Static. Then the dispatcher answered. Repeat location. Riverview Estates. Long silence. Finally, there is no Riverview Estates in Ash Hollow. Ben looked at me. I can see the street sign. Dispatch replied quietly. Return to town immediately. The radio went dead. Not static. Dead. Rain intensified. Water climbed over the curbs. Within minutes it reached the front yards. People began stepping onto their porches. Not running. Not shouting. Simply watching us. Dozens of silent faces. Every porch. Every house. Nobody spoke. Nobody waved. They just stared. Ben started the truck. We're leaving. I agreed instantly. We drove toward the entrance we'd used. Except, there wasn't one. The road ended at the river. No highway. No intersection. Only floodwaters stretching into darkness. I checked behind us. The neighborhood remained exactly where it had been. Porch lights glowing. People standing silently outside. Watching. We tried another street. Then another. Every road curved back toward the same central intersection. No matter which direction we turned, we ended up beside the same small park with the same rusted swing set. The GPS spun in circles. It couldn't find our location. Then the tornado sirens began. Not the steady warning tone. Just one short blast. Then silence. Again. And again. Ben looked at me. That's an evacuation signal from years ago. How do you know? My grandfather used to talk about it. Lightning flashed. For a split second, I noticed every house looked different. Not modern. Older. Wood siding instead of brick. Classic cars and driveways. The image vanished with the darkness. When the next flash came, everything looked normal again. Water suddenly rushed across the street. Not rising. Moving. Fast. A levee had failed somewhere upstream. Ben slammed the accelerator. The truck fishtailed before climbing onto slightly higher ground. Ahead, the highway appeared. Exactly where it should have been. We didn't question it. We drove. 15 minutes later, we reached the emergency command center. The sheriff listened carefully while we described the neighborhood. When we finished, he asked one question. "Did you say Riverview Estates?" I nodded. He slowly removed his glasses. There was a neighborhood by that name. What happened to it? It flooded. When? 1993. The entire subdivision had been destroyed after a levee collapsed overnight. 43 people died before rescue crews could reach them. The town was never rebuilt. I thought he was joking, until he showed us an old aerial photograph. The layout matched exactly. The park, the streets, even the curved entrance road. Everything. Months later, after floodwaters receded, I drove back alone. There was no neighborhood, only an open field covered with waist-high grass. Near the river stood a historical marker listing the names of everyone who died that night. I read each one carefully. Halfway down the list, I froze. The elderly woman, the young father, his wife, even the little girl who'd waved from a second-story window. Every person we'd spoken to that night. Their names were engraved in bronze. I've volunteered during floods ever since. Whenever we clear neighborhoods before rising water arrives, I make one final trip down every road, even the ones that don't appear on the map. Because sometimes, someone is still waiting for the evacuation that never reached them. Everyone thinks flood rescues end when the rain stops. They don't. That's when they begin. The storm moves on. The sky's clear. And rescue crews spend days searching neighborhoods that have turned into lakes. People wave from rooftops. Some cling to trees. Others are never found. 3 summers ago, I volunteered with a river search and rescue team after a historic flood in Arkansas. We answered one final distress call just before sunrise. According to every official map, the address we were headed toward had been underwater for nearly 20 years. My name is Evan. In the spring of 2023, weeks of nonstop rain pushed the White River beyond every forecast. Entire towns disappeared beneath muddy water. Bridges collapsed. Roads vanished. Our volunteer rescue group worked alongside the sheriff's department, using shallow draft boats to reach neighborhoods cut off by the flood. By the 4th day, we were exhausted. We'd rescued dozens of families. Most of us had slept only a few hours since the flooding began. Around 3:30 in the morning, we were preparing to return to the staging area when dispatch called. Team 7, stand by. The dispatcher sounded hesitant. We've received another emergency call. My partner, Chris, grabbed the radio. Location? There was a pause. Then, River Mile 12. Chris looked at me. That's impossible. River Mile 12 wasn't a neighborhood anymore. Years earlier, repeated flooding had forced every family to relocate. The entire area had been abandoned. Chris asked dispatch to repeat the address. The answer stayed the same. A woman's voice had called 911. She claimed floodwater had reached the roof of her home. Children were trapped inside. The call had disconnected before operators could get more information. The GPS coordinates matched River Mile 12 exactly. We didn't argue. If someone needed help, we were going. The farther upriver we traveled, the quieter everything became. There were no generators, no helicopters, no emergency lights, only the slow rumble of the boat engine and water flowing through drowned forests. The flood had swallowed everything. Fence posts barely poked above the surface. Telephone poles leaned at impossible angles. Street signs drifted in the current. According to the map, we should have reached River Mile 12 after 20 minutes. Instead, we found houses. Not one or two, an entire neighborhood. Dozens of homes stood partially surrounded by floodwater. Porch lights glowed softly despite the countywide power outage. The streets were submerged, but the buildings remained standing. Chris slowed the boat. This isn't right. I agreed. Every official record said the subdivision had been demolished years ago. Yet there it was, looking almost untouched. We tied the boat to a stop sign barely visible beneath the water. The first house looked occupied. Fresh tire tracks ended at the garage. Lights shined through the curtains. I climbed onto the porch and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. As I turned to leave, the front door slowly opened by itself. The living room was empty. Television on. Dinner still sitting on the table. Steam rose from a bowl of soup, as though someone had walked away only seconds earlier. Search and rescue. I called. No answer. Chris searched upstairs. I checked the kitchen. Everything looked normal. Except, every family photograph hanging on the walls had the faces scratched away. Every single one. We searched 3 more houses. Each one looked lived in. Each one completely empty. Coffee still warm. Beds unmade. Lights on. No people. No pets. Nothing. Then the radio crackled. Not dispatch. A child. Please hurry. The voice was faint. I'm scared. I grabbed the microphone. Where are you? A long pause. Then, the yellow house. I looked around. There were 3 yellow houses. Chris pointed toward the far end of the street. One porch light blinked on and off. We untied the boat and headed toward it. Halfway there, the engine sputtered, then died. The fuel gauge still read half full. I tried restarting it. Nothing. The river current slowly pushed us toward the porch, almost as though someone were pulling us. We climbed onto the porch. The front door stood open. Inside, a battery-powered weather radio repeated the same emergency alert. Flash flood warning. The date displayed beneath the warning made my stomach tighten. June 14th, 2008. 15 years earlier. Hello? I shouted. A little girl's voice answered from upstairs. I'm in my room. Chris started toward the staircase. The first step groaned beneath his weight. The second collapsed completely. Rotten wood. He barely caught himself before falling through. That made no sense. The rest of the house looked almost new. We found another staircase at the back of the house. This one held. At the end of the hallway stood a bedroom with the door slightly open. A nightlight glowed inside. The room was empty. Only a small stuffed rabbit lay on the floor. The child's voice came again. I'm under the bed. I knelt down. Nothing. Only dust. No child. No footprints. Nothing. Chris suddenly whispered. Evan. I turned. The hallway outside had changed. The wallpaper peeled from the walls. Ceiling plaster had collapsed. Furniture sat covered in mold. The house no longer looked occupied. It looked abandoned. Years abandoned. A loud crack echoed through the building. The floor shifted beneath us. We need to leave. We ran downstairs. The front door slammed shut before we reached it. The windows rattled. Water began pouring through the walls as though the river itself had entered the house. Chris kicked the door open. We jumped back into the boat. The engine started on the first try. Neither of us spoke until we reached the command center after sunrise. The operations chief listened carefully, then quietly asked, "What color was the house?" "Yellow." He sighed. "There was a yellow house." "What do you mean?" "It was the last one standing after the flood of 2008. A family refused to evacuate despite repeated warnings. By the time rescue crews reached them, the current had already swept the house away. A little girl was never found." I asked about the 911 call. The communications supervisor checked the recordings. There wasn't one. No incoming call. No radio traffic. Nothing. According to the logs, our boat had left the command post without being dispatched at all. Weeks later, after the floodwater receded, curiosity got the better of me. I drove to River Mile 12. The road ended at an empty field. The neighborhood was gone. Only a stone memorial remained overlooking the river. Engraved into it were the names of every family lost during the 2008 flood. At the bottom sat a faded stuffed rabbit, the same one I'd picked up in the bedroom. Except, I had left it there, in that house. I never told Chris. I never told the sheriff. Some memories are difficult enough without asking someone else to believe them. I still volunteer every flood season. Whenever the radio crackles with another impossible address, I answer, because somewhere along the river, there may still be someone waiting for a rescue that arrived years too late.